Hello, today we're going to be in Genesis 26, 24, and 25. And in this chapter, we're going to see some intrigue with Isaac. At the beginning of the chapter, Isaac is pictured very much like his father Abraham. He's sojourning in the land. He does some things with Abimelech, who his father had interactions with just a few chapters before this. He even mirrors Abraham's content with Pharaoh in Genesis 12, where he acts like his wife is his sister. He does that with Abimelech earlier in this chapter. And there's a big context about the idea of land and Isaac dwelling in the land and whether or not he'll stay in the land within this chapter. So those three ideas in Genesis 12, 1 through 3 of land, offspring, or seed is the Hebrew kind of equivalent of translation. And then the idea of blessing and curses is really prevalent in this chapter, but really in every chapter in the book of Genesis. So the Lord appears to him the same night and said, and God's appeared to Abraham in multiple places. Genesis 15 was a place where that happened. So this chapter is really trying to show like Isaac, right, has the same blessings as Abraham, his father. And so all of these things that Abraham did or went through, Isaac is going through in this chapter, showing that God is going to be with Isaac, even like he was with Abraham, in spite of the fact that Isaac is like Abraham in many ways, flaws and all. So the Lord appeared to him, that is Isaac, in the same night and said, I am the God of Abraham your father. So here, Lord is the name Yahweh. So Yahweh appears to him and says, I am the God of Abraham your father. Fear not, so don't be afraid. God has said this multiple times up to this point. For I am with you, and I will bless you, and I will multiply your offspring, your seed. It's the idea of blessing, the idea of offspring, for my servant Abraham's sake. So God is he's showing very clearly in this narrative that the covenant promises that were given to Abraham are also going to Isaac. So all of the Abraham language from previously, the language of blessing, the language of multiplying your offspring. So here with multiply, we've even got a little bit of creation language going on. And who is this for? Well, it's for Abraham's sake. So those Abrahamic promises, that Abrahamic covenant in Genesis 12 and 15 and 17, they're passing on to Isaac. And the text has been really clear about that up to this point anyway. So what is the response of Isaac? He builds an altar, and he called upon the name of the Lord and pitched his tent there. So he's building an altar, so he's worshiping just like Abraham did. So we see this pattern of altar building. Noah built an altar in Genesis 8. Abraham built an altar in Genesis 12, and then you see some altars in chapter 13 as well. Abraham builds an altar in Genesis 22 on Mount Moriah. All of these are for worship. All of these are for sacrifice, right? Atonement of sin, and ultimately just worship with God. And so we see the same things that Abraham was doing, Isaac is doing. And we actually see that even in this last little note here. And there Isaac's servants dug a well. You see the wells coming into play in multiple places in Genesis. With this text earlier in the chapter, there's some intrigue over wells, and then there is as well in chapter 21, again with Abraham. You can go back and read about the things that have happened with wells, but the point of this text is that God is going to be with Isaac like he was with Abraham. Those covenantal promises, the blessing, are going to flow to him just like they did to Abraham, in spite of really who he is. And ultimately, those promises of land, which is the context of the chapter, offspring, which we see very explicitly here, and then this idea of blessing, and then the blessing and cursing of the nations depending on how they treat Abraham and his offspring, is also present in this chapter. And we know that all of these are fulfilled in, as Galatians 3 talks about, when it's quoting that text about land, offspring, blessing, and cursing in Genesis 12, 1 through 3, this text right here, we know that this is the gospel that was preached beforehand, that through Abraham and that one offspring who was to come, who's going to come through Isaac, who's going to come through Jacob, who's going to come through Judah, is the one through whom all the nations will ultimately be blessed.